Hello, my name is Stella Hansen, and I am your instructor for Cultural Anthropology at Beatty Knott College. And this video is to help you understand how to do an ethnographic paper. Okay, so the first step to doing an ethnographic paper is to learn what it is to do an ethnography and how do you acquire the tools. So the first thing you want to do is thoroughly read the assignment from the beginning to the end that will help you acquire the necessary tools and understanding. We also have reference books on reserve at both the library and also at Bay West. So make sure you take a look at Spradley McCurdy on defining a cultural scene. Hello. Okay, so our first step here is going to be acquiring the proper tools in order to do your ethnographic paper. You should have the notes in front of you with Blackboard that you can refer to, which will give much more detail than what I'm going to say right now. The first thing that you want to do is establish where it is that you would like to do your ethnographic paper. Establishing that scene means that you need to have a fairly good idea as to where it is that you'd like to go. Acquiring the proper tools means that you're going to be able to respond to questions that you're going to get from these people that you'd like to study as to what is an ethnography. So you should be very familiar with the whole process before you go there and approach them about doing your ethnographic paper. What kind of settings would you like to do? We've seen it all. We've seen a funeral director, I've seen radio stations, clinical settings, classrooms, car dealerships, ice fishing, you name it, students have done their ethnography in a number of different places. The most important thing I can say to you is make it meaningful to you. You want to have a good place where you're going to enjoy being, because you're going to be there quite a few times during the course of this semester to study what's going on in that setting. If you are unsure of where it is that you'd like to study down the road, think about your own career. If you're going to be a teacher, you might want to consider a classroom. If you're going into nursing or clinical type work, see if you can get into one of those clinical settings. And you can always approach me, and I have lots of friends out there that have hosted our students, and I can help place you in a setting if you need it. Okay, so once you've kind of got a good idea of where it is that you'd like to go, the first thing that you need to do is to gain entry to that setting. Now there's a process here. The first thing that you do is submit a request, an ethnography request form to me from the course in Blackboard. There I'm going to ask you where it is you want to go, and then to be getting my approval before you contact them and ask them if you can do your ethnography there. We've had ethical issues that we need to address, and there's often been some ground rules that students need to understand. Number one, don't do your family. Don't be doing an ethnography on a close relative, because you're going to confuse your role with that relative. Even if you have the most perfect idea with somebody that you're very close to, I'm going to discourage you from doing that setting. It's just a confusion of your role with that person, and you don't want to be a researcher on one hand and a mom or a cousin or a parent on the other. So you want to be sure that you keep your personal life and your academic life separate. Okay, secondly, you need to also assure whoever it is that you are going to keep everything very anonymous and open. They are welcome to look at your field notes. They're welcome to talk about what they're going to say, and be assured that you are not going to repeat it in any other place but to them. Any kind of report that you're going to write up is going to be changing the names. It's going to be kept anonymous. People will not know where you're going to be in your setting. The second step, once you have learned about the tools and how to get started in an ethnography, the next thing you want to do is to gain entry into a setting. So the first thing that you will do is go to the Blackboard ethnography setting in Blackboard and fill out the ethnography request form. Turn that in to me as to where you think you'd like to do your ethnography. I will return it to you and give you approval or not approval to do the setting that you have chosen. And then, only then, will you contact that setting and ask to do your ethnography there. Okay, so now that you've gotten permission to be in the setting, you're ready to start your first day, which is probably the most important day in your setting that you will have, because you are going to make what hopefully is familiar seem strange to you. You won't know people, you'll be there for the first time, and you will see it with fresh eyes. So one of the first steps is to know the difference between emic and etic. The emic and etic perspectives give a balance to your ethnographic paper. Emic is telling the story from the perspective of your subjects. You want to know how they see themselves in their setting and how they find a sense of meaning in their setting. The etic perspective is your view, and that's going to play a secondary role. You want to be able to add what you think is going on down the road, but to begin with, your focus will be on how do your subjects see what they're doing and how do they feel that they have a sense of meaning by being in that setting. Now, that's not an instantaneous process. You have to have established trust with your setting personnel. You want to identify your key informant. You want to spend time getting to know them, understanding what it is that they're doing, and that takes time. And it also takes responsibility on your part, that if you say you're going to be there at a certain time, you're there at a certain time, or you notify them that you cannot make it. Also, once you get there into the setting, you're going to want to take very meticulous notes. All right, so once you're in that field for the first time and you have your notebook with you or even a tape recorder, what you're going to be doing is understanding what is going on in that cultural scene. I have a description in Blackboard about what it is to do an observational note, what it is to do a methodological note, and eventually you'll make theoretical notes. But to begin with, the observational notes are very specific detail. You give the day, the time, who's in the setting, and you're telling exactly what's going on within usually 5 to 10 minute increments, and you're basically scurrying as fast as you can in your writing, trying to capture everything that you're seeing in that particular setting. Also, while you're doing your observational notes, you want to be careful that you identify places in your observations that you notice are very important for your overall study. Maybe a particular incident happens and you jot down what happened. You might, at that time, pull away and give what you would call a methodological note. It's really a note to yourself that says, gee, contact Lucy. She's going to be a key informant down the road for understanding how this child has certain emotional problems and has special support services. Contact Lucy, who is in charge of that support services. So a methodological note is a note to yourself about the setting. Eventually, after all the time that you've been in there, certain themes are going to emerge, and that's where you get your theoretical notes. You might start to notice that there's a particular theme ongoing in your setting that you want to pursue. Maybe it is children learning how to read or children doing something if it's in a classroom. If your setting is in a restaurant, you might notice that there are certain patrons and relationship that they have with the staff. You might want to be focusing on that. So coming up with theoretical notes is very important for you to be able to pull this all together down the road in what we call establishing categories. The one key about all these notes is that when you're in the field, you're busy and you have lots of scurried writing. It's very important for you to take within 24 hours, go back over your notes and transcribe them into real English so you can remember what it is you saw. You go longer than 24 to 48 hours and it is gone. So my caution is for you to be able to go back to your field notes and transcribe them. Okay, out in the field. Now that you are selected your site, you're going out there for the first time, this is probably the most important day of all of your field notes because you're going into that setting with fresh eyes. And make sure that you have a good idea ahead of time what it is that you are hoping to see. But be objective. You're going to make something familiar seem very strange to you. Even if you've been in a classroom lots of times or you've been in a clinical setting lots of times, seeing it with fresh eyes is very important. Okay, and one of the things that is important on this also is to have a good idea of the different perspectives that you're going to use. For this assignment, the majority of what I want students to do is the emic perspective. The emic perspective is telling the story from the subject's viewpoint. Not what you, the researcher, thinks. That's etic view. I want to see what does that setting say about how do they find a sense of meaning by being in that particular setting. The etic view, the researcher's view, has a role to play also, but this report is not what you think, it's what they think. And you can add in the etic view, just make sure that you identify that it's your voice, your researcher's view that you're talking about in your report. Okay, and the other thing about this is that you're going to have to establish trust with this setting. You just don't walk in the door and say, hey, tell me how you find meaning being here. You have to learn that through your observations. You have to identify key informants in your setting. You're going to have to build a rapport with them and establish a sense of trust. And that takes time. You need to be reliable and responsible and give them plenty of understanding about what it is that you're there for. And then once that is established, what you want to do is begin to think about how to do field notes. So what I've done here is that I have a drawing for you about a typical page on a field note. Okay, when you get into your setting, you should have a notebook of some kind. You can also have a tape recorder if they've given you permission, or even a video cam if they've given you permission. It gets a little touchy when you're doing that because you have to have written permission forms for either the recording or for the video, okay? But with a notebook, you go in there and you're going to have a page that you're going to have set up. Every single day that you have your notes, you're going to have the date on the top of your page, the place of where you're at, give an idea of who's in the setting, and then you're going to have different times going down the side of your sheet so that you have at 10 o'clock, you're making what we're calling an observational note. And I'm going to get into the notes here in just a second. But what you want to keep in track of is you should have a watch on, get a good idea about the time, and if things are happening so fast, you can identify that in your notes. It'll be a bunch of scribbles when you're done, believe me. If your things are happening fast, you're just writing down short little scripts that you can remember later because you're going to have to transcribe your notes within 24 hours. All right? So let's talk about the different types of notes that you'll use. And I described this in the assignment, but you can also hear about it here. The main one that you're going to be using is an observational note. You're going to be in that setting. You're going to be observing what you're seeing, who's doing what, how different people are behaving or responding, and you're going to have just a series of observational notes. While you're in that setting, maybe something happens and you acknowledge that, gee, I need to go and talk to this person about that incident later on. So you might get to where you have an MN, which is a methodological note. It's basically in your field notes, it's telling you to go look up this person and talk to them about what you've just seen in the setting. It's a methodological note that tells you, hey, I need to pay attention to this kid later on because they're obviously showing me something that I want to follow up on. So your MNs, you won't have that many of them, but you will have some in your field notes. Down the road, once you've got your compiling of notes and you're starting to piece together the big picture, you're going to have what we call a TN, or a theoretical note. Now this is a note that sort of talks about what you've seen so far. It's building your theory. Maybe a theme is coming through in your observations. Maybe, let's say you're in a clinical setting, you're interviewing the staff, and some people are just wonderful in their setting. They love what they're doing. They enjoy their patients or residents or whatever their setting is. And you identify with them and say, oh, look at how they really enjoy their job. You might see somebody else that's like, I don't really get into this so much, but it's a paycheck. I have to work. I got a family to support. Soon as my shift is up, I am out the door. It's not negative. They do their job, but it's not the love of their life. In some places that you might be doing your ethnography in is a means to an end type of job, like a waitress or maybe a restaurant worker that is not there for life. They just are getting the wages that they need and get out the door. So you have a group of people that enjoy what they're doing and are very much into patient care, another one that's just like on their paycheck. Maybe you have another one there, I like it here because I get along with my coworkers. We go out after work and we have a good time, and that is exactly what I like about my job. I love who I work with and we enjoy what we do. So you've got 3 different themes here. So in your TNs, you might say, one of my themes is how they feel about their jobs. And you'd go back, and this is the beginning of your category. And we're going to talk about how to establish a category here in just a second. Okay, so one of the things I have to emphasize again, you want to transcribe those notes within 24 to 48 hours because you will forget what you've just seen. Okay. Okay, so now you've got a stack of field notes in front of you. You've got transcribed information. How are you going to make sense of your data? The best thing I can tell you to do is get out a bunch of different highlighters, like blue and yellow and purple or whatever colors you like, and now start to go through your data into your field notes and look for themes that are going to emerge. And when you see a certain important piece of detail, highlight it in that particular color. Go through all your field notes and find all the different relevant parts of your notes that go along with that particular theme. And then when you're really done with your establishing different themes, you're going to be able to go back and establish what we call categories. Now, categories are complicated ways of grouping your data so that you're going to have different categories for the way different subjects find a sense of meaning in the setting. Let's say you're doing a clinical setting and you're looking at your categories as a way to find how does the staff find meaning. Some people are there because they love working with others, they love helping. Others are going to be there for a paycheck. After you get your different categories, the theme of each category is going to emerge. How do people find meaning in this clinical setting? Well, you're going to have like 5 or 6 categories of people who say, I'm here for the relationships with my coworkers, I'm here for the patient care, I'm here because it's going to pay my bills. And that's how you establish themes. You've got copious notes, you've been there many times in the setting, and this is always going to be a question that students ask. How often do I have to go to the setting? And I can't tell you an answer to that. It's up to you. How much time you can put into it. You're going to get more into it, obviously, the more you're there. So when you're at this point, when you've been in the setting, you will realize, you know, maybe I need to go back again and figure something else out after I've been trying to sift through my data and make sense of it. So one of the things that you want to do while you're going through your information is that keep in mind the purpose of this ethnography. The purpose is to learn how do the subjects, the people in your setting, find a sense of meaning by being there. So if you're looking at a clinical setting, how do they find a sense of meaning in their job? If you're looking at a restaurant, what is it that puts lead in their pencil every day? Is it that paycheck, or is it, you know, their relationship with their patrons? Maybe if they're an owner of a restaurant, they want to make sure that they stay in business, right? So everybody has to work together. Okay, so one of the things that you want to do is, as you're trying to discern how do people find a sense of meaning, categories are going to be emerging. The example that I used earlier of the person in a clinical setting, some people are there because they really love the patient care. That's going to be a different category as to how they find meaning than the ones that are there just for getting their paycheck and doing a decent job and getting out the door. Those would be separate categories. And by the time you're done with your ethnographic paper, you'll have 3, maybe 4 categories of how people find meaning. It's not categories as to rank, like this is a nurse and this is an RN and this is an LPN and this is a CNA. That's not what categories are. They're categories of meaning. How do they have a sense of pride in what they're doing, or meaning in what they're doing? Okay, and as you get these categories, eventually what you're going to do is start to see the theme that each one has. And each category will have a theme, and you're going to use one of them to write up a vignette, which is the last section, which is final write-up. Okay. Okay, so your final write-up of your ethnography, the first thing that you're probably going to try to do is illustrate what it is you found in your setting. We call that a vignette. It's a short description of a story that you're telling about your setting. It illustrates one of your categories. I have an example of that in your notes on Blackboard, so be sure and read the example I have about the vignette. I think this one is on Raymond and how he got through his kindergarten day classroom. Okay, make sure you follow the rubric and the outline that I have given you in the assignment. The best way that I can tell you, that is exactly how I'm going to grade it. You have to have every component that's on the outline, and I will score it accordingly to the rubric that you also have in Blackboard. Once you have a rough draft written out, you're going to submit that to your group members. Your group members will have about 10 days to review your ethnography and get feedback to you, and then you will finally resubmit your final write-up to myself, and we'll also post it in Blackboard. The final write-up that you're going to do is not nearly as difficult as you may think. I've given you an outline in your assignment that I expect you to follow A, B, C, D, exactly how I want your report to look. The components of each one is important for you to understand how things are put together. And let me elaborate on that, okay? One of the first things that's going to be the most difficult for you is understanding what a vignette is. A vignette, and it looks like vignette in your text, but it's a vignette, and it tells a story. A vignette is taking one of your categories and illustrating it by telling a story about the situation. They're in first person. They identify fictitious names, but a real situation that occurred. It explains what happened in that particular vignette that says, you know, Johnny was coming in today and he obviously was distressed and he was not clean and he was disheveled and he was intermittently depressed and crying. I mean, you're going to set that scene if you're describing that particular kid. And by the time you get done with your vignette, you're going to have illustrated how that vignette illustrates your category. Now, let's go back to the example that I used earlier. Let's say you have somebody who's just there for a paycheck. That's one of your categories, and you've decided to write up more than one vignette, which is excellent if you can do that. And you can contrast different ways people find meaning. So the person who's there just for a paycheck, you're going to say, Liz comes in and she's throws her materials down. She sits down at the desk, and as the phone is ringing, she lets somebody else answer it. She's, you know, you're there though as first person. A patient rings. Liz gets up and goes into the room to deal with the patient. She comes back after she's cared for that patient and says, oh my goodness, there she is after us again. You know, she's giving you an illustration in her dialogue that she is not enjoying her job or that she is pushing her work onto another coworker. There's all kinds of ways that illustrate what that worker is feeling about her work. You could contrast that to, well, here's Sharon, and Sharon is very excited to be here. She's spends extra time helping the other CNAs do their cares as well. She's available, always answering questions. She's being there, accessible to her coworkers for consultation. She seems cheerful and has a great patient rapport. And you illustrate that in a story. Mrs. Johnson in room 3 wants to have her ice chips today. And so Sharon gets up and she goes and she delivers the ice chips to Mrs. Johnson and spends 5 minutes talking to her about her daughter's visit. You know, with the luxury of being able to do that, I'm not sure that's realistic, but I'm trying to give you an example that your vignette would tell the story and it would show a contrast. Now, when you're doing a vignette, you're going to have an introductory paragraph. It says, you're going to tell the reader why it is that you're telling them this story, what's important. You're going to tell the story, and then after it's over, you're going to tell the reader why it was important. Okay, so when you're done, you've got an evidence of your categories. Be careful while you're doing your research. You always want to look for disconfirming evidence. This gives soundness to your research. You think you have an understanding. Now go back in your field notes and see if you can disprove what it is that you think is going on. This adds a little more dimension of reliability and validity to your study. Okay. Also, following the outline will help you know exactly what it is that you have to do. And let me illustrate something else about the outline. And that is, you'll notice that you need to do a day in the life of your setting. And that's just what it is. Tell a story, a typical day of the life of your setting. If you're in a clinical setting and you're only there for a couple hours, you're only going to be able to illustrate that part. But if you can get different chunks of that shift during the time that you're visiting that setting, you'll be able to piece that together. And it helps the reader understand what it is like at that particular setting. You're going to illustrate your categories and then how your categories are organized. What is the theme behind each of your categories? And then how does your informants find meaning? That one is an important section. It's the key, and it's worth a lot of points in your overall report. I want you to give every category and what the meaning is in each one, and give an illustration, give a description, so that the reader can really feel what that meaning is. And then you're going to give your vignette. And the vignette is an additional story with lots of detail. Description and depth of description is the key to a good vignette. And it's going to it's almost the evidence of everything that you're trying to say in your ethnography, okay? And basically that's it for what you need to do in your write-up, except that the fieldwork methods is also another section. And that one is not nearly as detailed as the first part. Your fieldwork method is, why did you select that particular scene? What kind of gaining entry issues did you have, if any? And the types of fieldwork methods that you use. Did you just do observation? Did you use a survey? Did you videotape or use interviews? Include that information in that section. And then what the hard part here is, what influenced your selection of data? Now, a lot of things are going on in your setting. What makes you focus in on a particular event? And that is going to be most of what you need to do for that section. Try to tell the reader why it was important to you. And then your conclusion is, what have you learned about your cultural scene that you didn't know before? And then what would you have done differently? And that's basically your write-up. You will notice in the assignment that I have a rubric that represents each one of those parts, and that is how you do an ethnographic paper. I'm sure you have questions. Email them to me or contact me. I will do my best to help you. Thanks.